I had always been the one my parents relied on. From as far back as I could remember, I helped manage their affairs, ran errands, handled finances, and made sure their lives ran smoothly. I did it willingly, out of love and respect, never questioning whether my efforts were noticed or appreciated. I thought that my dedication strengthened our family bonds. I was wrong. The truth hit me like a cold wave one quiet evening when I was sorting through some papers in their study. I had been helping my father organize accounts and investments while my mother was busy planning her community charity projects. I stumbled upon a document that made my stomach drop. A will. Not just any will, but the final, legally binding version that detailed the distribution of their estate. As I read through it, my heart sank further and further. Everything, every property, every investment, every family heirloom was left to my brother, David. My name wasn't mentioned once, not even a small token, a token of appreciation for years of devotion and care. My mind reeled. Years of helping, of taking time out of my own life to support them. And this was the reward? I felt a mix of shock, betrayal, and anger bubbling up inside me. I couldn't confront them yet. I had to think, had to process the enormity of the betrayal. For years, I had assumed that loyalty, care, and effort were recognized in ways that mattered. But clearly, in their eyes, my labor was invisible. I felt a profound injustice, the kind that tightens the chest and makes every memory of giving feel hollow. From that moment, I made a decision. I stopped helping with their affairs. No more organizing bills, no more handling errands, no more mediating disputes or managing their schedules. I withdrew politely but firmly, telling myself that I was reclaiming my time, my energy, and my dignity. At first, the change was subtle. My parents noticed that I was less available but didn't confront me directly. I stopped answering calls about mundane matters, refused to intervene in family arguments, and quietly withdrew from financial oversight. The tension grew slowly, a quiet storm hovering over our interactions. I felt a mix of liberation and guilt. Liberation because I was finally putting my well-being first, and guilt because society, family, and instinct told me I should continue to care for them. Then came the day my parents needed help with a major financial decision. They called me frantically, expecting me to jump in as usual. But I didn't. I listened politely on the phone, offered no advice, and let them navigate the issue on their own. I could hear their frustration, their incredulity, and even a hint of anger. I realized in that moment that for years my involvement had been assumed, taken for granted. My absence, finally, was making them see the weight of what I had carried silently for years. I began to notice other changes, too. My brother David, who had been largely hands-off when I managed their affairs, suddenly stepped up. He realized the complexity of what I had been handling and the responsibility that had always fallen on my shoulders. It was a revelation, both satisfying and frustrating. Satisfying because he finally recognized the labor I had put in. Frustrating because it took my withdrawal for him to see it. With the distance I created, I began to focus on myself. I pursued projects and passions that I had long neglected. I traveled, invested time in friendships, and explored opportunities that had been on hold while I devoted myself to managing their lives. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of freedom and agency, a reminder that life could be lived, fully without constantly bending to the expectations of others. Eventually, my parents confronted me, confused and frustrated by my withdrawal. They asked why I had suddenly stepped back, why I no longer assisted with tasks that had always been taken for granted. I looked them in the eyes and calmly explained, "I've given years of my life to managing your affairs, often at the expense of my own. Seeing the will and realizing everything is going to David made me understand that my efforts were not valued. I need to step back to preserve my dignity and my life. The room went silent. My parents were visibly shocked, perhaps hurt, perhaps guilty, perhaps both. For the first time, the invisible labor I had carried for decades was acknowledged, not with applause, but with silence and the realization of my absence. That moment was pivotal. I had drawn boundaries firmly, and they had no choice but to acknowledge them. My brother, now fully aware of the effort I had expended, could no longer dismiss the work I had done or the sacrifices I had made. It wasn't revenge, and it wasn't spite. It was reclaiming my worth, my energy, and my self-respect. Over time, the family dynamic shifted. My parents, while still surprised and adjusting, began to handle more of their own affairs or rely on David, who had finally understood the scope of responsibility. I maintained my boundaries firmly, offering support when truly necessary, but never allowing myself to be consumed again by obligations that were never reciprocated or appreciated. In retrospect, discovering the will was a painful revelation, but it became the catalyst for transformation. I learned the importance of boundaries, of self-respect, and of recognizing when devotion is not returned in meaningful ways. My withdrawal from their affairs wasn't cold or cruel. It was an act of survival and reclamation. I had given too much for too long without recognition, and stepping back allowed me to rebuild my life on my own terms. Years later, I look back at that period with a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow for the betrayal and the pain of realizing my efforts had been overlooked, but gratitude for the lessons learned, the strength discovered, and the life I rebuilt. I realized that family bonds are complex, and love does not always equate to acknowledgement or fairness. But self-respect, boundaries, and personal integrity are always worth defending, even if it means stepping away from obligations once taken for granted. In the end, I found peace not in the inheritance, not in the recognition from my parents or brother, but in knowing that I had chosen myself, my dignity, my time, and my life, over unappreciated servitude. I had stopped helping with their affairs, but in doing so, I had begun helping myself, and that turned out to be the most valuable inheritance of all.